More than 400 figures from the UK fashion industry have signed an open letter to the Prime Minister Boris Johnson warning that post-Brexit red tape and travel restrictions threaten their survival. Signatories include Twiggy and Catherine Hamnett say some firms are already relocating to the EU. The UK's $35 billion pound sterling fashion and textile industry is set to be facing decimation as a result of red tape and travel restrictions thrown up by the new post-Brexit trade agreement with the EU. Fashion industry is said to be plagued with issues. Border red tape is frustrating trade, but Prime Minister Boris Johnson is soldiering on. He refers to the challenges as teething issues. With us is Allie Renison, head of EU and trade policy, where she leads in devising recommendations and representing the voice of members on EU policy matters. She's here to share her insights on these issues. Allie, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's now been a month since the UK exited the European Union. How well has this exit been managed? Just talked about the fashion industry a moment ago. There's lots of complaints about how things are going. In your view, which sectors are coping better and which are struggling, like, I guess, fashion?
Yeah, good morning. I mean, I think we've talked on this program before about some of the issues that leaving negotiations with only a week for businesses to adapt to go was going to make, and that's exactly what's happened. I think what we're seeing really is the impact is much worse because the agreement came through on Christmas Eve last year, and they were only given about a week to adjust. And so I think in terms of particularly those sectors who were affected by the movement of goods, the transportation of products, between the perfect storm of sort of having only a week to adapt to Brexit changes and the border closing actually at the end of the year because of COVID, it's making it really difficult for a lot of those sectors that rely on sort of just-in-time production and materials to arrive. I think the services sector is actually less affected simply because it can't operate as usual at the moment.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, services have been hit really hard. What are you actually hearing from business leaders? What are they saying? Are they getting enough support?
Well, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we want the government to try and tackle is that at the end of the day, there aren't enough customs agents for businesses to deal with at the moment. They're all trying to do it themselves. And so people aren't really sure of the new kind of documentation and paperwork requirements, which is leading to sort of lots of turnbacks at the border. And so I think what we're trying to get the government to do is make sure that they're putting in place adjustment, fiscal support, financial support for people to access the kind of specialist advice they need because they really can't do it themselves. But also what we've seen in the seafood sector is there's a lot of compensation demands. And even though there aren't actually tariffs in this deal, a lot of the sort of what we call non-tariff barriers, the sort of the new customs red tape is tying business up in knots. And what you're seeing is a lot of businesses saying this isn't just teething issues, this is structural change we're facing. And, if we don't make any changes, if there's not any financial support, then we're going to move outside of the UK and operations to the EU. So that's something for the government to decide. Is it worried about the tax base, being moved to Europe or not?
Thank you so much for that, Allie. Just to follow up, though, on terms of support, how do we rank all the support that Rishi Sunak, for instance, has announced? Are you basically saying that more needs to be done in terms of supporting businesses?
Well, the thing is that the support that was provided by Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Treasury, a lot of that was sort of just to carry on going. That really wasn't linked to sort of Brexit changes. And that's what I mean about the perfect storm that we've seen is that you've got businesses that was brought to its knees by the COVID, by the pandemic, that was given sort of financial support to continue just existing. But now actually in terms of the trade impact, we don't really have a lot of that financial support to help businesses weather the storm through the trade impact. And a lot of businesses are saying that their European customers are just not wanting to take orders from them because it's so complicated and so costly. Again, if I think businesses had more time to adjust to the new changes, I think the impact wouldn't have been so severe.
Thank you, Allie. I want to get to the EU and AstraZeneca, but I do have one more follow-up on the support. Debt to GDP for the UK, it's now, I think, it's levels not seen since the World War II or so. So at this point, if more support is needed, any concerns of debt would you say they're not on the table and they're just going to, Rishi Sunak is just going to soldier on with whatever extra support can be provided for the private sector?
Well, that's actually a question that I think that Chancellor Rishi Sunak is grappling with. We have the sort of annual budget in the first week of March, and there have been some suggestions that he's going to increase corporation tax, which is becoming its own argument about whether now is the right moment to sort of still carry on trying to deal with the debt and the deficit, or do we sort of just push it back for another 6 months to a year? So those are one of the big challenges, I think, facing the Chancellor now as he struggles to decide does he want to deal with this problem now, or does he want to sort of let us get through that COVID period and just up the vaccination rate and deal with it later?
Thank you. It's incredibly fascinating, the struggles that you just illustrated right now for Rishi Sunak. All right, help us understand the row between the EU and the UK over the AstraZeneca vaccine. Has it been resolved, or are there still hurdles that have to be overcome?
Well, I think this is sort of showing Brussels that it's weakest, quite frankly, and it's quite a shock to many, as this organization is flailing really in how it deals with unexpected kind of shorts of changing of supply and delivery. AstraZeneca had made commitments. The EU and AstraZeneca are arguing about whether those were binding commitments for production, simply because I think AstraZeneca is having production challenges in different manufacturing sites in Europe. The UK is trying its best, I think, to stay out of this. As far as it's concerned, it has a legal contractual arrangement with AstraZeneca where its flow of supplies aren't being interrupted. And the EU, I think, is under such pressure to deliver, having ordered these later than the UK government certainly to deliver for its European citizens, that it's now sort of trying to find some kind of way to try and make sure that the production sort of stays in Europe. I think the latest that we've seen is that AstraZeneca has increased its commitment, not by a huge amount, I think by an extra 9 to 10 million doses. But you can see that the EU is now just sort of flailing, kicking out, trying to find some way to prove to its citizens that it's not fallen behind as badly as it is.
Thank you for that, Ali. And, just to, does this, because, it's not just the EU and the UK going through this. South Africa just finally got vaccine deliveries, I believe, just yesterday at the start of the month. They've been under pressure and criticism from their citizens. Ali, holistically looking at this globally, with these kind of supply issues and pressure from different governments, does it show how, I guess, desperate or important it is to get this vaccine to as many people as possible?
Yeah, I think, with the identification of various different mutations in the virus, some saying that different variants are more deadly, more infectious, the rates are going up, the case numbers are going up. You have countries who are desperate to try and get sort of vaccinations up and running faster than they actually are at the moment. And so that's a challenge. We're sort of seeing that governments are defaulting to the vaccine nationalism that they had pledged to avoid. And I think that's why, the faster that more vaccines are approved, the better. So you have a more plentiful availability of supply.
Thank you so much. I want to talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We've heard over the weekend that the UK now wants to join the TPP. What are your thoughts on that decision?
Well, I think this is sort of very much in keeping with the government's political ambitions. I don't know how particularly relevant it is to businesses, because some of the countries that the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the new sort of revamped version without the US, the UK is already doing agreements with, and those are, I think, the important areas. But I think this is sort of an expression of the UK's ambition to try and sort of announce its arrival on the international trade scene. It wants to sort of play the trade game and be part of these kind of big regional sort of the TPP is also being seen as sort of a way for these countries to manage their response to China. I think it's sort of a big political statement by the UK government. I don't know if businesses quite know where they fit into it yet. But really, I think this is the UK trying to say, we've left the EU behind. This is our arrival onto the world stage.
Ali, was this always going to be in the UK's back pocket if Brexit hadn't worked out?
Well, I think that the UK government was clear once it was going to leave the EU's sort of customs union, which means that it was going to have control over its own import tariff policy, that it has a target of trying to make sure that 80% of its trade internationally is covered by trade agreements. So I think it's always been in the back pocket. It's not necessarily a substitute or replacement for the EU, which is how some, I think, critics are looking at it. But it's certainly something that the UK wants to show that it has arrived onto the scene. It is now negotiating trade agreements. So it was always part of the plan, I think.
Thank you so much. What does Prime Minister Boris Johnson need to do differently to, show progress with his promised new era for Britain? Or was everything he said, should that be chalked up as political rhetoric?
Well, I think to some degree, the extent, the ability of businesses to really, particularly for the UK, be part of this Global Britain initiative has been hampered by COVID. I think that there's no doubt about that. That has checked the ambition to a certain extent. But the UK wants to be seen to be part of the solution. It wants to be part of the group of countries that says, hey, look, trade is a fix here to COVID. It's not a fault. We shouldn't blame trade. I think the question that is on everyone's mind, at least in the UK, is that, while the government is doing lots of big trade deals, businesses struggling from actual trade challenges with Europe, which seems to get less of a focus, I think, politically. So there's a bit of a mismatch sometimes between the focus politically on trade policy and trade agreements and then the needs of businesses at home.
Does that mismatch that you just mentioned, does that cause Johnson to be seen as not making enough progress, or is his effort being recognized by businesses that you hear from?
Well, yeah, I think it depends on who you talk to. You know, the UK is trying to show that it is being a buccaneering kind of pro-free trade nation. It's about showing what its values are. We've heard a lot about the UK wants a values-based trade policy. But businesses, I think, are desperately looking for kind of a trade policy that focuses as much on its European challenges. You know, there's some people who would consider that the UK is really turning away from Europe, generally speaking, and trying to pivot towards Asia. I think what businesses are looking for is a better balance between what the state wants to do and say it can do on trade policy, and then what the needs of businesses are right now in the current present.
All right, great. So speaking of those challenges, some have said that the media, I guess, exaggerated the adverse impact of the UK leaving the Union. Recent manufacturing PMIs, Purchasing Managing Index, for the UK was not so bad. Allie, were we too pessimistic on the post-Brexit phase?
I think in terms of looking at it overall, you know, on its trade perspective, I think the UK is struggling a lot more than people expected because businesses weren't given a lot of time to adjust. And then that's the question that leads to the question about the wider sector, the PMIs that you mentioned. I think that Brexit was always going to be a challenge rather than an insurmountable challenge for businesses. And I think that's reflected in the different numbers. You know, if you focus on the trade picture, it's quite significantly negative for business. But in terms of the overall picture health of the sector, it's certainly not having this sort of world-ending impact that some people thought that it might.
All right. Now, Africa is keen to understand the opportunities that post-Brexit UK offers for trade. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, you know, the government is focused very much not only on expanding the international focus of its trade policy, but also particularly it's big on using development, you know, trade, less so aid, so to speak. So I think that matches with focusing on Africa as sort of an unheralded area of opportunity. There are links that the UK has over time that perhaps it hasn't leveraged the way that France has. There's been some sensitivity politically about doing those kind of things. But really, it's you know, an area I think that the UK government wants to say, we have arrived, we want to expand our horizons, and Africa is as much a part of that as the rest of the world. And,
well, in terms of priorities, though, Allie, where do you think Africa ranks? I mean, it looks like the UK, because of all the challenges with Brexit and so on that it's facing, and the COVID-19 pandemic, that the priorities, I guess, would be TPP, post-Brexit, post-Brexit execution. So do you think Africa is up there?
I don't think necessarily it's interesting how it fits into the puzzle. I think that it's sort of a combination of, you know, it wants to do a pivot to Asia, but it wants to very much focus on new opportunities as well as development opportunities. So I think Africa is a big part of the kind of the focus on what can we do to improve our kind of development relations with parts of Africa. I wouldn't say it's necessarily number one priority because we've seen Asia so much in the focus, as is New Zealand and Canada. I think it's probably what we call the second order of priorities from a trade policy perspective. But then what I distinguish that from trade promotion, what I mean by that is that, you know, the actual commercial side of trade rather than just the negotiation side. That's something I think the government really wants to get businesses into. Unfortunately, I think the pandemic has taken some people's eye off the ball simply as they try and hold on to existing trade with Europe.
Allie Renison, head of EU and trade policy at the Institute of Directors think tank. Always a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for a very informative discussion. We appreciate your insights on post-Brexit matters. Thank you, Allie.